So.
Okay, so what we have here, at this point you can see we've assembled all of these sights, and the way we've done that again is to do smaller pieces in the top, bigger pieces on the bottom. Now this here is a control module when we get to the very end, and that goes in the upper left. Again, the water is going to flow from this controller to the very back sight, and then it's going to go through this circuit in a serpentine pattern, and eventually return back here through these two holes. Now again, this main hole in the bottom is what the water is flowing through. This is an overflow safety valve, just in case if for any reason this clogs due to roots or due to anything getting in the line. We might want to make sure that there's never a problem. Now in this unit, there's a couple things that I want to point out. This right here is an electronic float valve. When this valve is up, the water turns off as far as coming in from a backup source, which I'll explain in a second. When this valve is down, it means that the water levels drop down, and it's going to start adding water with this tube until it reaches the perfect height. Now that's really important because you don't see that on hydro systems, and it's a really crucial thing. This float valve is situated such that when a net pot is in here, which is the little basket that the plant roots sit in, it keeps the bottom of the basket wet, but it doesn't fully submerge it. The reason being, it allows for wicking up of water in the organic plugs, which again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, the first thing that I want to show you when you go to set this up is there's a little clip that's set here in the side of the plastic. You take this tube, which is just a longer black tube that we'll have pre-cut for you, and that slides right through this hole and basically just snaps right in. This does not matter if it's pulled out a little bit, if it's pushed in, just as long as it's in place. The only thing we don't want to happen is for this tube to wrap around the float valve and cause any kind of problem, so it's just a safety. Now on this electronic float valve, you can see that there's yellow wires that have different markings on them. We have number 1, number 3, and then this is the upper portion of the controller, which has numbers 1 and 2. It'll make sense in a second, so just hang tight. And then we also have this additional black tube as well, which again we'll talk about in a minute. Now, what we're first going to do is take our bottom sight and put it right in here where it's supposed to go. And we've got our two fittings, our smaller top one and our longer bottom one, and we're going to install those. Just like we did with all the other ones, we put the bottom one in at the bottom, the top one in at the top. Again, making sure there's Teflon tape on it. We just press it in a little bit with our hand, take it to the last sight in the circuit. Again, how we talked about before, you just squeeze them together, just like that. It's assembled and it's water sealed. It's that easy. So now what we're going to do, once we have our tube in place, we're going to take just a normal lid. You can see that there's no hole cut out on this. There's a reason for that. We're just going to push it down. And the next thing we're going to look at is the top bucket. Now the top bucket acts as a water backup reservoir. So basically what happens is when your plants are growing normally, they're going to be sucking through a lot of water. You might be talking 3 gallons a day, you might be talking 30 gallons a day. It really depends on how big your plants are and your humidity and evaporation levels and all that jazz. For that reason, one of the critical things that happens in hydroponic systems is if you typically start with, let's say, a full bucket of water, if you lose 50%, what happens is all your nutrients that were in that water concentrate. So if you started with 1,000 ppm at this level, you might be down to 3,000 ppm at this level because the salt's concentrated because all the water evaporated off or was sucked up by the plant. So what we do is we make sure that that water level stays at the same height to prevent those extreme fluctuations in fertilizer and also in pH as well. It just buffers things out. So now this backup reservoir is only 5 gallons, and like I said, it can be between 5 and maybe 30 gallons a day, depending on how big your plants are. You know, in the early stages, you might only go through a gallon a day. Again, it's tough for us to say, so that's why we have this. Now, the key with this system, too, that's really nice is you can actually, if you want, you can get a 50-gallon drum and put it right outside of your system and tap off a 50-gallon drum instead of this 5-gallon bucket. This 5-gallon bucket is just what comes with to make things easy. But again, you can use any size you want. Now inside here we have a really small water pump, and it's a 12 volt, it's low voltage, and the reason we use this small water pump is because we don't have to do any high output you know, water flow. It's just slowly filling the whole system, so a little water pump is more than enough. Now you can see that we ran the wires from the water pump and the black tubing out of the top hole on this side. It really doesn't matter which side it comes out of, just as long as it's coming out of the top. Now in this unit here, there's a number 1 and a number 2, like we talked about and you saw on the yellow switch. And we'll go over that in a second. the first thing that we're going to do is take the tube that came from the lower bucket, and we're going to snap it onto the tube on the top. Now you might ask yourself, why is there this T in the tube? Why doesn't it just go directly into the bucket and connect to the water pump? And there's a reason for that I'll explain. There's something called the siphon effect that occurs. So we have a water pump in here, again, that's connected to this tube, and it's pumping water out and into our controller down here that's going to keep the level perfect with the flow. The problem is, once that water pump starts flowing, it creates a siphon effect, and it'll empty out this whole 5-gallon bucket until there's no water left. Once we start the pumping action, it's just like a fish tank, like you have a siphon filter where you suck on the end and it goes into a lower bucket. Because this bucket is higher with gravity than this bucket, it's going to drain itself down. Now this tube that's connected here allows air to go back in and to stop the siphon effect. So that little tube goes right in here, and you'll find that water never ever comes out of it, but we just put it in here just to be safe. So now our upper reservoir is connected to our lower one. We sit it right inside the groove there. And we're going to go on the back, and we're going to look for number 1 and number 1. And you can see we made it easy with these fittings where they just snap together. Nice and easy. Alright, that's 1. We have 2 and 2. Now the next thing that we have is a low voltage power adapter. That supplies power to the water pump. And with that, you can see we have number 2 and number 2. Again, they snap right together. And number 3 and number 3. Now the reason we don't hardwire this is because it makes it easier in case you have to disconnect it for any reason. They just snap together and disconnect very easily. Now we take our 12-volt power adapter and we plug that in to one of the many cords that comes with your system. And what will happen is, if the water level in your system is below that float valve, it'll automatically pump water from this bucket and even everything out and keep it perfect. Now I have a lot of people that often ask, what do? Do you put your pH up or pH down in here, or your fertilizer in here? My recommendation is don't put fertilizer in here. For the reason being we talked about before, because when water evaporates out of your system naturally, it'll concentrate the nutrients. So you don't want to keep adding nutrients. You want to add just normal water. As far as pH, typically when your plants are growing very well, they take the pH and they drop it through the floor and turn the water very acidic. That's a sign of good growth. Now because of that, you can, if you want, put some pH up in here, basically some base, the pH up. As far as how much, you can put in a teaspoon or 2, nothing crazy. You just have to watch it and play with it. Because we don't have a dosing system on this, which is where it automates all the levels electronically, you just have to test it every day, 1 to 3 days, just to make sure you're on the level. Now that's basically it for the controller. It's all set to go. It takes maybe 2-3 minutes to set up. It's very quick and easy, but I wanted to go through everything. And again, when you're adding water to your system, all you have to keep doing to make sure that your water level is perfect for the entire system is just lift the lid and look inside and just keep adding water to this. Again, if you're going through it too quick, you can take that whole water pump out, take this whole pump out, and just drop it in another bucket of a different size that's outside of your cabinet, possibly due to the larger water capacity not fitting inside here. So that's pretty much it for this section. Okay, now at this point what we're doing is we're taking a normal garden hose and we're filling up at one of the sites, basically where the net pot is. When you fill it for the first time, you can just fill it at a normal site. You don't want to fill it in the controller unit because the water pump won't be able to compensate fast enough. You could always take this piece off and put the tube right in there if all these sites are full of plants and you're doing a water change down the road. We'll talk about how to do water changes in a minute. For now, I want to cover the air pump installation. Now you can see here that what we did is we ran the air tubing to each site. Now the way we did that is those T's on the top, we take this air tubing and we basically just pop it right into the T's. We talked about it earlier in the film, how each T has the bubbler at each plant site that's pressure compensating. And the tubing connects from site to site. Very simply, just cut a piece. We're going to give you a large roll. You just cut a piece to go from one to the other. You'll notice that even at the end one, the tubing connects from site to site to site. The reason being, what we're going to do is we're going to take, for the air pump, which I'll talk about next, we're going to actually cut this tubing at any point along the joint, put in a T similar to this one, and we're going to run the air line into that. The reason being, the air pressure is going to build up all along the line, and it's going to only come out of these pressure compensated air bubblers at a certain rate. So we just need to make sure that the line that's running across the top has good pressure, and then everything else will go from there. Now, as far as the nut pouch, we'll talk about that in a minute too and how to set those up.